The full moon in Sagittarius on June 11th marks one of the biggest shifts of the year, the entrance of Jupiter into Cancer on June 9th. Jupiter is exalted in Cancer, and so the essential dignity of Jupiter is elevated and raised up. We like Jupiter being exalted because Jupiter is the great benefic, a planet that is supportive of life and growth and generation. Jupiter goes with things such as prosperity and wealth, as well as generosity and charitable giving, alliances, friendships, general support, as well as justice and freedom and release from bonds. Now, the transits that are going on this next year that are part of all these incredibly dramatic changes are complicated and challenging in many ways. And so Jupiter entering its exaltation of Cancer is not going to just magically take away all of the difficulties, but it makes things much more workable and it gives us great support for bringing about the visions and ideas and new changes and ways we want to be co-creating as part of the great changes that will be going on all around the world. And so that does make this transit of Jupiter in Cancer from June 9th of 2025 until June 30th of 2026 something to be excited about and hopeful about. Hey, I'm Gray Crawford. I'm a professional astrologer, and my favorite part of my practice is working one on one with people to talk about the astrology and how to empower them in pursuit of their goals and their life. My books are open for June, and so if you'd like to talk about the meaning of Jupiter in Cancer, as well as all of the other astrology happening, I will put a link to my scheduler below so you can book an astrology consultation with me. In this video, I'm going to talk about the meaning of the full moon in Sagittarius, as well as the greater meaning of Jupiter being in Cancer. And then I will go through a delineation for each horoscope, for each sign of the zodiac, to talk about not only the meaning of the full moon in Sagittarius, but also what you can expect or begin thinking about the meaning of Jupiter in Cancer for you during this next year. Now, Jupiter does change signs once a year. And so Jupiter changing signs isn't necessarily unusual. But when Jupiter changes signs, when Saturn changes signs, they mark much larger societal collective changes because they are the slower moving of the traditional seven planets. And changes in collective events and big societal shifts are even more dramatic when we also have even further out planets such as Neptune and Uranus and Pluto also changing signs. And so the reason this entrance of Jupiter into Cancer in part is such a big deal is that we already had Neptune leave Pisces to enter Aries at the end of March. Neptune had been in Pisces since 2011 or 2012. And then we had Saturn leave Pisces to enter Aries on May 24th. And so to have both Saturn and Jupiter change signs within a few weeks of one another does show big changes coming through, especially since they are both happening in cardinal signs. We've had Saturn move from the mutable sign of Pisces into the fast moving cardinal sign of Aries. Likewise, Jupiter moving from the mutable sign of Gemini into the faster moving sign of Cancer in terms of it being a cardinal sign. Because these cardinal signs go with fast moving events coming in, initiating changes. This is even more powerful because that 0 degrees of the cardinal signs, where Saturn is and where Jupiter is now, are part of the world axis. And these bring manifestation into visible big changes into effect in even stronger ways. And so we have this very powerful alignment of Jupiter coming into Cancer to then form a square aspect with Saturn in Aries. But it's not just Jupiter in Cancer coming into form a square aspect with Saturn. It's also Jupiter coming into form a square aspect with Saturn and Neptune. And so while we can be hopeful and excited about Jupiter being exalted in Cancer, we also have to recognize that Jupiter is part of a very complicated configuration of forming a square aspect to both Saturn and Neptune. And that will be taking shape in the week following the full moon in Sagittarius. While Jupiter is exalted and raised up in Cancer, Saturn is brought down low into its fall of Aries. And so there is stuff that we can do here, and it is a workable situation. But we also have to realize that that presence of Saturn in a superior square aspect to Jupiter can bring some delays. It can bring some obstacles and challenges to whatever we are trying to bring about with Jupiter. And because we're talking about Saturn and Neptune coming to the end of their cycle as Jupiter is coming into a square aspect with them, this signals that there are immense, extraordinary changes with how we collectively perceive reality, great boundaries and barriers and borders, whether that's geopolitical boundaries of countries, whether that's borders and barriers and philosophical and scientific thought. All sorts of great changes, great technological innovations are all coming through and streaming through at a rapid pace. And this can be a very confusing time because of all the great fast moving changes that are taking shape. Positively, though, Jupiter exalted in Cancer does bring a big sign of hope for how we can work with these great changes happening with Saturn and Neptune coming to the end of their cycle in Aries. I especially like how Jupiter exalted in Cancer can go with greater power of the people to stand up for and fight and embody their own sense of justice, especially in terms of the corruption going on with different world governments and world leaders and governmental institutions that go with the meaning of Saturn being in its fall in Aries, combined with Neptune in Aries. Jupiter in Cancer also goes with greater care being brought into our communities, our families, our interpersonal relationships, our relationships with animals and plants and the environment, being stewards of the land. And so there are many ways that Jupiter exalted in Cancer can bring a sign of hope. And it does mark a time of getting more clear about what it is you do want to work towards and build with your life and making a plan to do that. I think that's going to be one of the most helpful ways to work with a combination of Saturn in Aries with Jupiter in Cancer. Jupiter is the piece that's all about the vision and how to bring things into form. But Jupiter always has to work within those laws and structures of Saturn. Now, Saturn in Aries likes to initiate things, be bold, move a little bit faster than is the most effective pace of Saturn, because Saturn does like to be slower, more cautious, build something very patiently and thoroughly. So, one way that we can work with this is to envision these long term goals that we have and long term plans, but set much shorter, targeted short term goals with short term results and effects we're trying to bring about. Work with that ability of Saturn in Aries to bring in change and get things moving and line it up with these shorter term goals that are going to build towards these much larger plans that we want to bring about in the world. The other thing about Jupiter being exalted in Cancer is that Jupiter's exaltation in Cancer is a dramatic difference in essential dignity from the presence of Jupiter in Gemini during the past year. Now, Jupiter in Gemini can do many great things. It's a very intellectual placement of Jupiter that can pursue all sorts of fascinating ideas and research and generate all types of innovative ideas. However, Jupiter in Gemini is as far as possible for Jupiter to be from its home sign of Sagittarius. Sometimes this is called Jupiter being in detriment or Jupiter being in exile. There's an inversion of Jupiter being in the sign of Mercury opposite its home sign of Sagittarius. And so this can make Jupiter a little bit more frenetic and scattered and distracted, a little bit more intellectual. And so, what's really nice about Jupiter moving out of Gemini into Cancer is that nurturing quality of Cancer and the water element. Now, while cardinal signs like Cancer do go with fast moving changes and events coming in and being able to initiate things, Cancer is a water sign that is more internal, a little bit slower in that way, in terms of really knowing how to nurture growth, as well as, like I said, bringing care into our relationships and into our community. And so, in these ways, it really does bring a lot of hope for what we can nurture and grow during this next year of extraordinary change. Now, one of the complicated things about Jupiter entering Cancer on June 9th is that although we do have a dramatic elevation of essential dignity of Jupiter, Jupiter is also invisible and too close to the sun to be seen. And so we're actually in the process of this liminal death and rebirth and regeneration of Jupiter as we come into this full moon in Sagittarius. Now, when Jupiter actually in your location moves from being visible into being invisible and then returns to visibility will depend on a lot of different factors. But in astrology, we do have this idealized range of 15 degrees on either side of the sun, signifying the planet being under the beams of the sun and moving through this liminal passage of something ending, something being regenerated, being reanimated when the planet like Jupiter comes into its conjunction with the sun, and then the planet being reborn with an intensified presence of renewal when the planet experiences its heliacal rising and becomes visible again as a morning star. And so around June 3rd, about a week before the full moon in Sagittarius, is when Jupiter moved within 15 degrees of the sun. And so this marks this liminal passage, which will extend into the first couple of weeks of July, at which point Jupiter will return to visibility. And so as we get into the second week, about mid July, we are going to be able to experience a much more potent and reanimated quality of Jupiter in Cancer, which will come in a lot stronger at that time. As far as this full moon in Sagittarius, though, we still have a quality of Jupiter in Cancer coming in, but it is like Jupiter that's operating a little bit more behind the scenes. It may not be quite fully visible with its effects in your world. Now, what's really powerful coming up a couple of weeks after the full moon in Sagittarius will be the superior conjunction of Jupiter in Cancer on June 24th. That's going to be about 3.5 degrees of Cancer, and that'll be one day before the next new moon in Cancer on June 25th. That's going to be happening obviously a few days after the Cancer solstice, which is coming up here not too long after the full moon in Sagittarius. And so these are going to be some dates to really pay attention to and really set some powerful intentions of growth for the year ahead when we get to June 24th and Jupiter is renewed into a new cycle. And then we get a new moon and a new lunar cycle coming in the next day on June 25th. And then, like I said, as Jupiter finally becomes visible, as we get into mid July, we will have much more visible manifestations of what this Jupiter in Cancer transit will mean for us coming into effect at that point. This is a chart for the Sagittarius full moon on June 11th, set for Washington, D.C. And while the entrance of Jupiter into Cancer is a big deal, like I've been talking about, it's not the only thing going on with this full moon in Cancer. As I've talked about recently, the other big shift we had recently was Venus finally getting out of Aries, where she spent so much time this year retrograde and moving direct back and forth across Aries into Taurus. And so the Sagittarius full moon has both Jupiter in his exaltation of Cancer, as well as Venus in her earthy domicile of Taurus, both benefic planets in strong essential dignity, which is very hopeful for bringing new life and focusing in on what you care about, what you want to grow and generate and create. At the same time that Venus is in Taurus, Mercury in Cancer is moving fast. And in contrast to Jupiter, who is invisible right now, Mercury is in the process of becoming visible as an evening star at this full moon, while also forming a harmonious sextile aspect with Venus in Taurus. This is extremely creative and fertile, and I hope that whatever insights and revelations you're getting about what you want to do with your life at this time of this full moon in Sagittarius, this sextile between Mercury and Venus can be really supportive for you figuring out how to bring that about. All in all, there's really just a lot of support here for improving relationships, improving friendships and alliances, people that are aligned with you, aligned with your values, aligned with what you want to bring into your life and create. And so hopefully this full moon can direct you towards who to deepen those bonds of relationships with at this time. The other big thing going on with this full moon is a fiery triangle between that full moon in Sagittarius with Mars in Leo, as well as Chiron in Aries. Because this is a fiery full moon, there is that heat of that fire element that's very alive, that enlivening quality of fire that can lift us up and inspire us to go after more of what we want to create and bring about. This fiery flowing trine between the full moon in Sagittarius and Mars in Leo is incredibly strident and inspirational and will be lighting a fire to go after more of what you want to create and build and do with your life. But because it's also involving a flowing trine with Chiron and Aries, this makes me think about ways in which the incredibly challenging but also change inducing astrology we've gone through during the first 6 months of this year, which involved a Venus retrograde, a Mars retrograde, really powerful eclipses, and all sorts of other astrological alignments. In one way or another, there's likely been some old wounds or just challenges that have been brought up and you've had to face and work through. And now that we're coming to the end of this Mars in Leo transit that's been going on really since last December, towards the end of 2024. Mars has been in Leo a really long time because it's stationed retrograde. It went back to Cancer, then it finally came back to Leo. We're now getting towards the end of this transit. And although the Mars retrograde transit was over a long time ago, because we've got this back and forth movement of Mars and Leo, there's going to be some final lessons related to this Mars retrograde time period coming up. And whatever you've worked through, and whatever ways in which you forge new strength and new awareness. I think the Chiron placement in this trine is going to help you connect in with the ways in which whatever challenges you faced have now opened up these powerful lessons to draw strength from. The other thing going on with this fiery trine is the fact that Mars in Leo is involved in this fiery trine, but also is heading into a square aspect with Uranus and Taurus that can be very volatile and combustible and inflaming. But again, in the way that we have Mars trining Chiron and the moon, in the way that Chiron works with the Uranian sphere, this could also be part of, in combination, some very powerful breakthrough ideas and innovations that are coming in here. Now, likely the square aspect between Mars and Uranus that's going to become exact a few days after the full moon on June 15th is going to go with some very difficult violence and just challenging world events. On a personal level, as long as we are focusing in on our goals and allowing for the fact that there could be some unexpected changes and just things we have to adjust to and react to that are really not planned, because that Uranian element can really be a wild card with how that shows up. I do think that a lot of innovation, a lot of invention, a lot of breakthroughs, some deep changes that we have been building and working towards across these first 6 months of the year, we might feel a real burst and breakthrough in relation to whatever that is we've been working on and having to face. And at the same time that Mars forms that exact square aspect with Uranus on June 15th, we are also going to be experiencing the even more powerful square aspect between Jupiter in Cancer with Saturn in Aries. I really can't say enough about how powerful this configuration is on June 15th. I feel like in another year, if there weren't so many other dramatic astrological alignments going on, this square aspect between Jupiter and Cancer with Saturn and Neptune in Aries would be getting even more attention than it already is getting. But we have to keep in mind that this is the third and final square aspect between Jupiter with Saturn in this past year, and that these square aspects go back to that extremely powerful great conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn in Aquarius at the end of 2020, a conjunction that signaled we had fully entered this 200-year era of Jupiter and Saturn forming conjunctions in air signs, and a 20-year cycle that was signaled by that Jupiter Saturn conjunction in 2020 that will take us through 2040. This means that we are at the critical waxing square of this cycle. And so this is connecting us into much larger collective changes and collective historical changes that are going with this new era of time that we are entering here in June. And so while the square between Jupiter and Saturn is incredibly important because it's marking changes in this whole 20-year cycle that we're living through right now, which is going with all the great societal shifts and changes happening all around the world. It's also interesting because it's happening in different signs. Last August in 2024, we had the first square between Jupiter and Gemini with Saturn in Pisces. And then at the end of December in 2024, not long after the solstice, we had the second square between Jupiter and Gemini and Saturn in Pisces. But this will be the third and final one, and it's happening in different signs. And so it's really signaling there is some sort of new level and new wave of change coming in. And it's even more powerful because Saturn and Neptune are so close together right now. They're almost getting towards an exact conjunction. And the Saturn and Neptune cycle goes with even more extraordinary change. The Saturn Neptune cycle, really, as I've talked about before, goes with our very sense of collective reality and what we collectively perceive to be reality changing. There's all sorts of obvious big things going on related to technology and AI, as well as all these different global geopolitical alliances all shifting and changing, all these huge developments in scientific thought going on, likely new spiritual movements coming in, all of these big changes happening. And so it's not just Jupiter forming a square aspect with Saturn, it's also Jupiter forming a square aspect with Neptune. That square between Jupiter and Neptune goes back to the conjunction between Jupiter and Neptune that happened in Pisces in April of 2022. So if you think back to that year of 2022, Jupiter and Neptune were together in Pisces, and they were bringing in a big potential dream and vision and sense of this new life direction and purpose and imaginal ideas that you could bring about with your life and your work. But, being Jupiter and Neptune, they could have been extremely imaginal, extremely visionary, something that would take time to build and really be able to bring into reality. And so now we're coming into the square between Jupiter and Neptune. At the same time, we're coming into the square between Jupiter and Saturn, at the same time that Saturn is coming together with Neptune, all really close to those zero cardinal points of the world axis. So this is just extremely powerful. And while there is great uncertainty in the world with all the big changes happening, this is the thing to remember, that this is a point of contact between these three planets that can really build entire new worlds. This is the time to really go after that dream you've really been wanting to build, and build it securely and thoroughly, and go all in on the change you want to create, because things are going to be dramatically changing. And this is an aspect to really go all in on, about creating the life you really want to be building and developing over the course of this next year. And so while the square between Jupiter with Saturn and Neptune is speaking to these much larger collective changes, as well as very significant personal changes that we're going through, the square between Mars and Uranus is more of just a temporary aspect that is still going to be part of the big changes that are happening. And it does make me think about the volatility of the changes going on in the world right now, all the great violence and bloodshed going on all the way around the world. But it also speaks to the breakthrough ideas, like I was just talking about, the great innovation that can also be going on at this time. And so it really just adds to a period of time right here in the week following this full moon in Sagittarius of big changes happening. There's going to be all sorts of things going on in the world. So really, depending on where you are and how you're being affected by the big things going on, you're going to have to just kind of be aware that there's going to maybe be some things you just have to react to and respond to that might be coming in really fast and furious in some ways. But there's also support here for really breaking out of the past and breaking ground into a more fulfilling and authentic and empowering life direction at the same time. It also means that Mars, as you can see here, is getting to the very, very, very end of Leo. This means that Mars is about to enter Virgo, and that will happen a couple of days later on June 17th. So this will be about a week after the full moon in Sagittarius, but this is another major shift because Mars has been in Leo and Cancer for so long. Mars has been in Cancer and Leo since last September of 2024. And so to get Mars finally out of those signs where Mars was going back retrograde and direct into Virgo next week is another reason why we are in this very powerful portal of great accelerating changes. And so hopefully that presence of Venus and Taurus, as well as Jupiter in Cancer, can be really supportive for you in going after what you really want to truly create. So I will now go through a delineation for the meaning of the Sagittarius full moon, as well as a transit of Jupiter in Cancer for all 12 horoscopes, all 12 zodiac signs. I would pay particular attention to your rising sign and ascendant sign, but you will also find it very meaningful and relevant for your sun sign as well as your moon sign. Sagittarius, this full moon is in your sign. And so, first and foremost, there is just something about who you are in the world amidst all of these great changes that are going on right now that is being illuminated, as well as something about your relationship, since the sun is also over there in your seventh house. But of course, the big change happening right now is that entrance of Jupiter into Cancer, into that exaltation of Jupiter in your eighth whole sign house. Now, the eighth house does have some challenging significations, but it also does go with support, especially in terms of financial support and resources of your alliances and relationships. So, whether you're in a primary partnership or romantic relationship, or you have different business partnerships, or you're working with other people's resources in one way or another, this is the area where Jupiter in Cancer is coming in to bring growth for you. So you might want to be looking at what you are investing in, who you are investing in, who you are collaborating with. And if you have different partnerships and different financial relationships with other people, this can be an area where you are really expanding and growing and nurturing some developments. Now, at the same time that Jupiter in Cancer, as well as its temporary transit of Mercury in Cancer, is coming into that square aspect with Saturn and Neptune in Aries in your fifth house. Now, this could definitely go with the topic of children, whether you have children or work with children, but there's also just a general sense here of your creative direction. There's something very potent coming in here about your creative direction with the Saturn and Neptune transit that is being activated. Now, there's going to be perhaps be some delays and challenges in a Saturn way, but because we're talking about Saturn and Neptune, there's incredible creative potential. And so there might be something about partnerships and alliances and investments that are being gathered in relation to what are these creative directions and creative projects that you're really wanting to build and bring about in this next year. Now, the other big aspect in this full moon is that Mars in Leo square aspect with Uranus in Taurus. So whatever has been going on for you with that long transit of Mars in Leo, Mars retrograde in Leo, Mars moving direct in Leo in your ninth house, whether that's been something involving pilgrimage or religion, spirituality, philosophy, academic studies, or coursework in one way or another. If there's been things like that you've been really engaged with, there could be very dramatic breakthrough ideas and big culminating realizations erupting for you into your awareness at the time of this full moon. That's all part of what gets activated here for you. We are also coming towards the end of this first initial pass of Uranus and Taurus in your sixth house. And with Venus and Taurus also in your sixth house here, there might be some extra attention that can be brought into daily routines and diet and health habits and just how you're applying yourself to your daily work and tasks and that sort of thing, just to make things more effective. And again, because in about a month, Uranus will go into Gemini. And so there's also some final lessons of what Uranus and Taurus has been activating here that's going to be coming up for you. But I hope that this full moon in your own sign is going to be illuminating some sort of big creative revelation and breakthrough for you that will really give you a lot of inspiration for what to continue working on in this year ahead of Jupiter being exalted in Cancer. Capricorn, this full moon in Sagittarius is in your 12th house, but the big change is Jupiter moving into his exaltation in your 7th house. This entrance of Jupiter into Cancer is such a big deal for you, Capricorn, and I am so happy for you. You had a long Mars retrograde transit in your 7th house that could have stirred up some relational difficulties or challenges in one way or another. Whatever the case has been, Jupiter now coming into your 7th house should be bringing you a boon and a boost in relational support and growth. There could be some exciting new friendships coming in. There could be some exciting new business partnerships or collaborations or just supportive alliances coming in. There could be all sorts of mending of past relational challenges. So in the ways that, all these things that have been going on have been aspecting your 7th house in one way or another, because we've also had Saturn come into Aries and Neptune come into Aries, forming a square aspect with your 7th house. There's probably been also combined with the Venus retrograde in Aries squaring your 7th house. Issues just brought up what you need to work on in your relationship. This could be romantic, this could be in friendships, whatever it is. There's probably been big realizations you've been gained and gaining. And now that Jupiter in Cancer comes in here, it's really the time to be making the most of this. This could be deeper senses of intimacy, but just also greater support in one way or another. And so this also could even involve community support and community resources that can greatly benefit you. There's also then the fact that Jupiter is coming into Cancer to square Saturn and Neptune down in your 4th house. And so, as part of these relational changes and growth coming in, there's also something going on with your home. So, this could involve, of course, moving, but it could also involve renovations of your home, making things better for you and your partner, or your roommates, or your living arrangements, whatever that could be. There could also be some deep realizations about inner patterns, about your early childhood, your relationships with your parents and family, or even deeper ancestor issues that are also coming up that are part of realizations and awareness you're gaining about these relational patterns that then are part of how this deeper intimacy or deeper support or more positive relationship changes start coming in here with this entrance of Jupiter into Cancer. Now, the full moon in Sagittarius, though, being in your 12th house, is not in an angular house, and it's in this much deeper, darker, liminal place of the psyche. And so this could be a full moon where it's going to be more helpful to sort of withdraw and get some space and time for yourself to deeply reflect about all the things that have been going on, all the big changes that have been happening, and doing that deep reflection and getting into your own space and conceptualizing what you do want to be creating and building, and also releasing and letting go of. That will help you make more full contact and awareness of what this Jupiter in Cancer transit can bring for you. Aquarius. The full moon in Sagittarius is in your 11th house, which is a great house to be illuminated in terms of all the big changes that are going on and what you really want to create and bring into your life with alliances and community, things that really go with Jupiter becoming exalted in Cancer. So hopefully there's just going to be some great awareness coming in about what is being illuminated for you with your work and your ambitions and your aspirations and people that you can collaborate with and alliances you can form and all that sort of thing. But Jupiter exalted in Cancer is actually now in your sixth house, forming a square aspect to Saturn and Neptune in Aries in your third house. Jupiter coming into your sixth house is going to also bring a lot of focus into your health and your daily routines and habits and patterns and how you go about that daily work that you need to grind out and go after. And so Jupiter exalted in Cancer here can bring awareness to hygiene. This can be physical hygiene, emotional hygiene, spiritual hygiene. What are some practices that you can put into place to restore yourself, to replenish yourself, to give you more energy to go after these big plans that you're developing? If you felt yourself really burned out because of Mars being in Leo in your seventh house for so long now, maybe really kind of driving you to go after things more, this is a time with Jupiter in Cancer in your sixth house to make sure that you are also taking care of yourself, getting out of your head, getting into your body, figuring out, are there some dietary changes that you also might want to make? Are there other things that you can bring in for support? Maybe there are a certain type of coach, like a workout coach or a yoga teacher or a diet consultant. There's all sorts of, consultants and coaches and guides, Jupiterian types of figures that intersect with these sixth house topics of health and routines that you might be able to contact and bring in for support to kind of streamline things, give yourself more energy to go after what it is that you really want to be creating. Now, the Saturn Neptune combination in your third house, obviously, in some ways, that could just be going with some big changes that are happening in your local environment and your local community. But this also certainly can go with communication. And so there's also something probably really dynamic happening with that. And whatever that might be, if there's some new communication, writing, social media, internet, technological developments coming in and changes you're wanting to make there, and new growth coming in with that Saturn Neptune combination there, the ways that you can use that Jupiter in Cancer to give yourself more energy and give yourself more support for getting through all your to-do tasks and give yourself just more energy to make all that happen. That's going to end up being really helpful for you in this next year to make sure that you're really taking care of your body and your health as you figure out these big projects and goals that you want to be working towards. Pisces, this full moon in Sagittarius is in your 10th house. And so this is a big and bold lunation for you in terms of your work and your actions in the world. But the big news is that Jupiter has now entered Cancer, and Jupiter is now exalted in Cancer in your fifth house. So this is a really powerful full moon that's signaling this big change of Jupiter getting out of your fourth house in Gemini into your fifth house. Now, this could go with the topic of children, and Jupiter being in your fifth house could even go with the desire to have your own children coming up or working with children in some kind of way. But the fifth house can also just go with our creative children and our passions being brought into that realm of creativity. And so with the full moon also illuminating the 10th house of work and career and vocation, there is probably some big awarenesses coming up here and being illuminated about the creative direction for you to take in this next year. And this transit of Jupiter in Cancer in your fifth house is one to really take advantage of, to be more creative and bring in more of what you want to create, finding the alliances and support that are going to help you bring that about. One of the most remarkable things about you, Pisces, when I look at this chart, is that there's almost nothing in Pisces now except for the North Node. The first 6 months of this year, you've had so much in your sign. You had Saturn there, you had Neptune there, You had Venus retrograde there. At a point, like everything seemed to be in Pisces. Now it's just a north node. Now, that's still significant because we of course will have a lunar eclipse happening in Pisces later this year. And that north node being in your sign means there is some sort of important growth and ambition that's still coming in for you. But you have this sort of presence of the absence of what's no longer in your sign. Now, Saturn and Neptune are in Aries in your second house. And so they are bringing in awareness to financial considerations. And so that financial consideration is also a key part of what you're going to have to face. It's not just going to be going after whatever it is you want, whatever it is you want to create. You need to think about the financial aspect of things. How are you going to be making your money, making your livelihood? What kind of budget are you operating within? All those types of financial considerations are going to need to be met and addressed. But as long as you're doing that, this can be a very innovative time. And there may be this great sense of relief that you're actually feeling now that Saturn's no longer in your own sign and Jupiter has moved out of that angular place into that juicy, creative, fertile fifth house. So I hope you enjoy this full moon and it brings you all sorts of exciting revelations. Aries, this full moon in Sagittarius is in your ninth house with Jupiter now exalted in Cancer in your fourth house. You are still adjusting, I'm sure, to that presence of Saturn and Neptune in your sign. The entrance of Saturn and Neptune into Aries has been a huge, extraordinary change for all of us to deal with. But you, more than anybody, has been dealing with it the most because it's in your sign. Now that Jupiter has gotten out of Gemini and is now exalted in Cancer in your fourth house, this is going to be making your home, the place where you're living, an important focus of growth and nurturance and generation. So there's something obviously big and major going on with who you are in the world and the way you're being changed while Saturn and Neptune are going with all these enormous collective changes. But while there may be ways that you're really being pulled into new areas of your work and who you are and who you need to show up to be with your roles in the world, Jupiter in Cancer is going to be stressing the importance of making sure that you're tending to your inner life, to your family, to your unconscious dreams and realizations, and also just to your home, spending time at home, maybe making some renovations at your home. If you've been wanting to move or change residences, that also could very likely be coming in here. But there's going to be something about tending that inner life that's also going to be very important for you during this next year, while at the same time, there's just going to be really big changes with who you are coming in with that Saturn Neptune conjunction. And while Saturn can go with important growth and building something really solid, Saturn can also bring a lot of pressure and a lot of gravity and some obstacles, and it can feel like a big weight. And so I think creating a really nurturing home environment for yourself with this Jupiter in Cancer transit can be a way to get a refuge from some of that stress and create a really powerful, potent, restorative sort of incubator to bring about whatever it is that are going to be the big changes and realizations and new creative directions that are going to be happening for you with Saturn and Neptune in Aries. Now, this full moon in Sagittarius, though, it's in your ninth house. And so this could be really illuminating some big ideas that you've been developing. If you've been in any kind of course of studies, that could be coming up here. You might be getting ideas about places that you want to travel to, even going on to a foreign country or going on some sort of pilgrimage somewhere, or perhaps there's new spiritual insights and being drawn into some other kind of higher mind dimension, whether it relates to spirituality or philosophy or some other type of course of study, or just active mind, active ideas. The other thing going on is, of course, Mars and Leo in your fifth house, coming into a square with that Uranus. It's been in your second house for a while. So you've had this long Mars transit through your fifth house. And especially at the end of 2024, when Mars went retrograde in Leo, there might have been some big changes with your creative direction you realized you were going to have to make. Now that we're coming to the end of this Mars in Leo transit and it's coming into the square aspect with Uranus, there might be some final big breakthroughs and culminating realizations about whatever has taken shape with your creative direction that will now be illuminated for you with this full moon in Sagittarius. And so I hope you get some really helpful realizations about whatever that may be for you. Taurus, this full moon in Sagittarius is in your eighth house, and you now are experiencing Jupiter exalted in Cancer in your third house, forming a square aspect to Saturn and Neptune in Aries in your 12th house. So the entrance of Jupiter into Cancer in your third house means there's something about communication, writing, getting the word out there, speaking, and also building that local community, the local environment of where you are, alliances, friendships, things that you're building there. Getting, we're in this era of obviously increasing technology and social media and the internet. All that's been building and building and building. And there also has been at the same time a lot of people wanting to disengage from that and get involved in person, in in-person events in their local community. And you are in a prime position this next year with this transit of Jupiter in Cancer to be a key part of that, getting involved in your local community, doing local community organizing, using that ability you have to really bring in some stable long-term growth and support, bringing that into your local community. It also just could be an exciting year of developing new writing, research, ways you're speaking, communicating. If you are somebody that does use the internet, maybe you have your own YouTube channel, maybe you do writing, maybe you have a social media account in some way that's really important to you. That could also be ways in which you're really developing things. And because we have so much technological change coming in, that's going to maybe be part of it, how you're being really creative and growing something with that Jupiter in Cancer transit there. Now, the full moon in Sagittarius is actually in your eighth house. And so, this could be illuminating some deep, kind of darker parts of your psyche and some deeper patterns that are part of the big changes going on for you at this time. Also, if you have important collaborations, shared resources with either a romantic partnership or business partnerships or just friends, investments you have, that's also going to be very much illuminated here. Also, just thinking about in general the giving and receiving, the give and take and exchanges that you experience within your relationships, making sure that's balanced and making adjustments and modifications just to bring greater equity and greater balance into whatever kind of relational dynamics you have with other people, especially those that involved any kind of shared resource. Now, the other thing is you're still adjusting to this Saturn transit in your 12th house. And so Saturn and Neptune in your 12th does really show that although you are somebody that has big things coming in that you're working on, I mean, you've got this Pluto and Aquarius transit that's going on in your 10th house. Pluto is definitely calling you to go deeper with something with your work. You've still got Uranus in your sign. You're still getting some final lessons about that. But Saturn and Neptune are pulling you into a more liminal place. And so there may be more and more of a draw to also get some time to yourself and go into not total just like isolation from everybody, but just pulling back to withdraw and really shed whatever ways you've been developing anything that's not in your true authenticity or your true self to try to fit in with whatever you need to be doing, whatever idea you have of how you need to fit into the system or for success or whatever that might be. Use that Saturn and Neptune transit to pull away from that, reconnect with your authenticity, reconnect with who you really are and what you want to do and create, and then really go for it. There's going to be some great support for you in this next month with Venus being in Taurus in your sign. And again, I really love the exalted Jupiter transit for you in your third house for some really powerful growth and new friendships and alliances and support with where you're living and working in your local community. Gemini, this full moon is in your seventh house. And Gemini, you have had so much going on this year. Whenever I've been doing these horoscopes, I feel like I've always been talking about how busy things are for you. You've had so many things activated. And this full moon is very activating for you because it is in your seventh house. And so something about your relational dynamics with other people is being illuminated. There might be new waves of support, new friendships, collaborations coming in for you that's exciting for you with this full moon. But things are not quite as busy for you all of a sudden. Now, up there in Pisces in your 10th house, there's just a North Node. Now, in your first house of Gemini, it's just the sun. And so the Jupiter Saturn square has moved out of these angular places for you. It's really brought a lot of growth and busyness, but it's probably been at times almost like too much that you've been trying to take on. It's now shifted into your 11th house and your second house. And this means that Jupiter exalted in Cancer is in your second house. And you have a year now to really be nurturing and developing and growing your finances and your livelihood. And so this is a great time to be making plans, financial plans, figuring out your finances and ways to be generating more income. Whatever happened for you with that Mars retrograde transit in Cancer in your second house, it might have brought up fears and challenges related to finances. Hopefully, now with this Jupiter in Cancer transit, you're already starting to feel a new wave of hope and new opportunities coming in. And it is going to be a time to be really growing your assets and your resources and figuring out how to support yourself financially in whatever direction is coming in for you because you've had a lot up in your 10th house this year. And so something about your career and your vocation has been activated. Something's been changing. Saturn and Neptune and Aries are now in your 11th house. And so there's still something being reshaped here about your aspirations, about your ambitions, about the community that you're part of, that you're growing. And so there's something about how you're growing that and stepping into this new sense of purpose that you're building for yourself with all the great world changes going on. And now Jupiter in Cancer is here to help you figure things out more on that financial level and how to really grow some wealth and greater prosperity for yourself. Now, if you're already well off and doing well financially, maybe this has more to do with that generosity side of Jupiter and the charitable giving of Jupiter in Cancer in ways that you can be more of a philanthropist and support people doing really powerful work with those financial resources that you possess. Whatever the case may be, the fact that the full moon is in Sagittarius, don't forget there is just a big, major relational component going on here. Who you are, what's going on with your relationships. This is really activated for you here at this time. The other thing just to mention is Mars in Leo. finally coming to the end of this third house transit with, Mars had been retrograde in Leo in addition to being retrograde in Cancer in your second house. And so as Mars comes to the end of this Leo transit in your third, squaring Uranus, this is something to do with communication. It might have something to do with where you're living, local environment. There's some ways that you've been tested, some kind of new innovation that you've been asked or been inspired to step into over this time. Whatever that has been for you, it very well could have something to do more on the communication, writing side of things. But whatever it is, there's going to be some final lessons coming through here for you and some final breakthroughs. And so, with that fiery flowing trine between the Sagittarius full moon and Mars and Leo, hopefully, if it's in something involving like your local community and that sort of thing, there are some really helpful alliances and new relational developments coming in here that can bring about some really exciting creative breakthroughs for you. Whatever the case may be, I really hope, Gemini, that you feel a little bit of a sense of relief in the way that the planets have shifted here and that it leads into some very supportive growth for you. Cancer. This full moon in Sagittarius is such a big deal for you because of it marking the entrance of Jupiter into Cancer into your sign. Now, Jupiter in your sign of Cancer means that there is some type of important major growth in who you are in the world and what you are doing with your work in the world that's coming in this next year. Saturn and Neptune are now up in your 10th house of vocation and career and actions in the world, with Jupiter in Cancer bringing in this expansive new sense of yourself. And just in this, next period of time, Mercury in Cancer also really quickly, speedily moving through that first house into this new Mercury phase of being an evening star. This is a really exciting time just to be really feeling into the new opportunities coming in for you about who you are in the world and what you want to do with your work in the world. However, the full moon in Sagittarius is in your sixth house. This is much more of a liminal place. And so attention is also being called for you to look at how are you taking care of yourself? How are you managing your health and your body? Because you might be getting all sorts of exciting new ideas and new opportunities, but you're going to need to have the energy for it. You're not going to want to burn yourself out. You're going to want to be in this for the long term and figuring out how to make this more sustainable for yourself. And so the full moon could be illuminating things like diet or just practices that you can be putting into place for mental hygiene, spiritual hygiene, emotional hygiene, also whatever can help you get the energy you need to be in the good health to be in so you can really take advantage of this incredibly powerful Jupiter in Cancer combined with Saturn and Neptune in Aries transit. This is a big deal for everybody, but it is hitting your chart in especially powerful ways. And you look to be one of the signs that's really here to make a big statement and really come in with some kind of significant wave of new growth that's going to be part of the much bigger changes that are going on in the world around us. Now, the other thing going on, of course, is Mars and Leo coming into that square aspect with Uranus, who is in your 11th house. There's also Venus and Taurus in your 11th house. So there is some real support for community and alliances that's also coming in here that's going to help you really connect in with this new way of being with your work in the world. But that Mars and Leo transit is bringing up some kind of final lesson here for you on the financial front. So, whatever has been going on for you with this long Mars and Leo transit, you're going to be getting some final realizations about that financial piece that's important, obviously, as part of these big changes that you're going to be putting into effect in the world. Leo. This full moon in Sagittarius is in your fifth house, with Jupiter in Cancer now in your 12th. So, exalted Jupiter in Cancer in your 12th house is not a house that is, as front and center. It's a house that is more liminal, more behind the scenes. And so, this speaks to me about something being possible to nurture and grow away from the busyness of life. Perhaps going on a retreat in some way, or just getting space away from the busyness of things to really connect with this deeper part of yourself, to really redream the future and redream what you want to be creating with your life. The full moon in Sagittarius, though, is in your fifth. And so this particular full moon is very creative for you and will likely be illuminating this new sense of creative direction that's coming in for you. That full moon is in trine to Mars in Leo, who is finally coming to the end of your sign and this long transit. I think that's going to ultimately be a huge sigh of relief once Mars leaves Leo finally, about a week after the full moon on June 17th to go into Virgo. But at the time of the full moon, Mars is still in Leo, squaring Uranus up in your 10th house. And so, however, you've been impacted by this long Mars in Leo transit that involved Mars being retrograde in Leo at the end of 2024 and beginning of 2025, there are final lessons coming in here. So you may have been tested. You may have had some very difficult experiences that you've gone through as part of this. So, whatever has happened for you, there are some final big lessons and realizations here coming in. And if this has been creative and innovative for you, and you have gone in some new directions that are pretty exciting, there could be some final big breakthroughs that are part of that process that comes in here as Mars and Leo forms that square aspect with Uranus. However, the other thing to keep in mind is that Venus is in Taurus in your 10th. And so I do like that transit in terms of some real fertile support for whatever new direction is coming in for you here that you might be getting a sense of. And so hopefully that full moon in your fifth house is really going to illuminate a more fulfilling creative direction to be taking your work. And that Jupiter in Cancer transit in your 12th can start helping you open up this new dream and new sense of a deeper direction to ultimately start embracing as we come into this period of rapid, accelerating change. Virgo, this full moon in Sagittarius is in your fourth house, with Jupiter now exalted in Cancer in your 11th house. Jupiter has his joy in the 11th house. The 11th house is a Jupiterian place of alliances and friendships and support and aspiration and hope. And so you get this big injection of exalted Jupiter combined with fast moving Mercury becoming visible in your 11th house. And so hopefully, Virgo, this full moon can really be illuminating this new sense of hope and ambition that you really want to be taking your work. And there is a lot of community development and nurturance and growth to really be stepping into in this next year. It can be a time of finding deeper alliances of people that are really aligned with your sense of soul and purpose in the world. Yet the full moon is illuminating the inner life. It's illuminating the fourth house. It's illuminating something about your home, something about perhaps even your early childhood, a relationship with your parents, or even like your ancestors, or even something more unconscious. So while there's definitely stuff going on relating to your work and who you are in the world taking shape, the full moon is illuminating something much deeper within you. And so whatever those realizations are that you're gaining with this full moon, that's going to then feed into these more communal changes that are taking shape for you. Otherwise, the other big aspect with this full moon is that square between Mars and Uranus. So Mars is in Leo, coming to the end of your 12th house. Whatever's been happening for you with that long transit of Mars across your 12th house, there's a final lesson that's coming in here. And that square to Uranus can be pretty volatile. So make sure that you are taking measures to keep yourself calm and grounded and relax your nerves so you're not having too many types of overwhelming 12th house sorrows or fears overwhelming you. But hopefully, whatever has been happening with this, there is a new sense of breakthrough creativity that can come through for you here. Now, Saturn and Neptune are in your eighth place. And so there is something interesting here in the combination with that and Jupiter being exalted in Cancer in your 11th. It definitely makes me think about shared resources with other people. So there's something about even the 11th is also like the resources of where you work or your career. The 8th can be all sorts of shared resources, whether that's a romantic partnership or business partnerships or investments you have. There's something here where you are being drawn into shared collaborations, shared investments. And so hopefully something is being illuminated for you here about that. It's also going to be a time with Saturn, Neptune there, and Jupiter squaring it in the 11th to be making sure you are in a good balance in terms of give and take, giving and receiving within these different relational partnerships or collaborations or alliances. Libra, the full moon in Sagittarius is in your third house, with Jupiter now exalted in Cancer in your 10th. So the entrance of Jupiter into your 10th house plus Mercury moving through there right now really fast and becoming visible is definitely going to be opening up new senses of your career direction. And an exalted Jupiter in your 10th house this next year means that there are big opportunities coming in with who you are in the world, with your work. And so there are going to be new visions of possibility, new opportunities for who you are and what you're doing and what's your role and what's your vocation coming in. So just be paying attention to that. It's going to be an ongoing thing. This whole next year, you're going to get deeper and deeper realizations about that. But you may already be getting an initial sense of some changes related to that just with Jupiter coming into Cancer. Now, Jupiter in Cancer is squaring Saturn and Neptune in your 7th. And so there's also something very important about your relationships in relation to this new sense of career direction. So hopefully that can be in a supportive way, but it also means that you're also going to have to be weighing and balancing the relational aspects of your life. I mean, Libra, of course, you have the reputation for paying attention to relational dynamics anyway, but that's going to be especially important for you with that Saturn Neptune bringing that change and pressure and gravity into that 7th place of relationships. So you're going to be having to work with relationships as part of this new career direction. Now, one way that can work out is through really powerful collaborations and finding the right people to collaborate with and align yourself with. At the same time, Mars in Leo is coming to the end of that 11th house transit, squaring Uranus. So there might be some big realizations and breakthroughs coming in here related to who you are collaborating with and who you are in community with. But of course, the full moon in Sagittarius is down in your 3rd house. So in your local environment, in your local community, there's also something really being illuminated here for you. And that might be part of however that relationship piece is coming in, impacting this new sense of career direction. Also, though, because the 3rd house can go with writing, communicating, speaking, there might be some big innovative ideas related to that with your work that you're also getting some big revelations for at this time. Whatever happens for you, Libra, I'm very excited for you with this exalted Jupiter transit through your 10th. And so I hope you are getting some early exciting ideas of what that can mean for you with this full moon. Scorpio, the full moon in Sagittarius is in your second house. And so there is, first and foremost, here with the full moon, some type of awareness being brought to the financial area of your life. Now, this could have to do something with how you're making money, any types of budgets that need to be coming in here. It also could perhaps just illuminate and bring some new energy and new opportunities and new income streams, new ideas for how to earn your money. But the big change is, of course, the fact that Jupiter is now in Cancer. And for the next year, you're going to have Jupiter transiting your ninth house while exalted in Cancer. And at the time of this full moon, Mercury will be moving quickly across your ninth house in a sextile aspect with Venus and Taurus in your seventh house. I love this Jupiter and Cancer transit for you this next year, Scorpio. This could be a time of travel for you and great exploration. You may be called to go on an important pilgrimage somewhere. This could be going to some type of sacred site in a foreign land or a pilgrimage of the mind, exploring things deeply with your mind, whether that's through signing up for courses or new academic studies, or it's just your own research and your own probing deeply into matters. But this is going to be an exciting year of developing all sorts of exciting new ideas that will really be enlivening your work. The other thing that's big at this full moon is Mars. Mars is in Leo, finally coming to the end of its transit across your 10th house. You had Mars station retrograde back in December of 2024 in your 10th house. Mars went back into Cancer, came direct again, and has been moving all the way across your 10th house. There's been some sort of big movement and change and action happening in your career and your work in the world. You've been fighting through something. You've been going after something. You've been persevering through something. And whatever that is, and whatever you've worked through, there is likely some kind of big final breakthrough on the horizon here for you at this time of the full moon, with Mars coming into that square aspect with Uranus. The other thing with that, because the Mars Uranus square can be volatile and unpredictable, just being aware that something could happen that's unplanned, might need to make an adjustment to related to your work. But in general, I really like this in terms of the final lessons, the final breakthroughs, the final realizations that you're gaining about this long transit of Mars and Leo across your 10th. And I think it would be worth your time to really think about how this Mars and Leo transit has forged new growth for you with your work, new determination as well. The other thing then about that Jupiter and Cancer transit in your ninth is that Saturn and Neptune are now in your sixth, forming a square aspect to that Jupiter and Cancer in your ninth. And so because they're in your sixth, you are going to need to pay attention to your health and your routines. And so while this Jupiter and Cancer transit can be extraordinary for travel and new ideas and generating all these new ideas and inspirations, you're going to need to avoid the pitfalls of burning yourself out. You're going to need to take care of your body. You're going to need to be bringing in some powerful hygiene practices of mental, spiritual hygiene, emotional hygiene, movement, exercise, ways to take rest, ways to work with those 6 house topics and make sure you're on top of your health, on top of your daily routine, so you put yourself in the best place to get the most out of your mind and your work. But I think overall, this can be a very exciting year for you with Jupiter in Cancer moving across your 9th house. And so I hope this full moon in Sagittarius brings in some big realizations for you about that, as well as some financial boons, or at least some exciting new ideas about ways to change your relationship with money and finances in more beneficial ways for you. And so, all in all, no matter what your rising sign, sun sign, or moon sign is, this full moon in Sagittarius is going to go with great changes for all of us. And so, I hope you get some very productive and beneficial and inspiring realizations for you about whatever that is. If you haven't already liked and subscribed to my YouTube channel, please do that as it really does help me out. Also, if you would like to talk about this astrology that's happening and how to work with it in more empowering ways, I would love to work with you about your chart. I'm going to put a link below to my scheduler so you can book an astrology session with me. My books are open for June and I still have some slots left this month. I will also put a link below to my Patreon. I have an active Patreon community. There's extra material that I share there that I don't share elsewhere. You also get some discounts for working with me. And there are also 2 different tiers, each of which has a different monthly class that you can participate in and join the community there as part of that. So please read more about my Patreon below. Well, that's it for now. I hope this full moon in Sagittarius illuminates some meaningful goals and projects you can work on, nurture, and develop with this potent Jupiter in Cancer transit we'll be experiencing this next year.